Welcome everyone. We're here with Paul again doing another webinar. This time we're talking about beads and what we can do with beads. Now, Paul, one of my favourite games you showed me many years ago in Dubai is tug of war, and I still do that at the dinner table with my son. So it's one of my favourites with a 20 bead string, and we'd have 10 on each side with the dice, and we have the game. So it gets very competitive. We did try it with 100 bead string, but it went on for a long time. So I look forward to talking about adding, subtracting, and I know that you're going to talk about the language as well. We should go over the language. So thank you very much, Paul. I just want to mention that you have a fantastic Beadstring book as well, and lots of resources on your website, which I'm sure you'll go over today. So thanks, Paul. I won't take much more of your time.
Thanks, Heather. You stole some of my thunder because we will play the tug of war game a little bit later. So just when we're talking about beads or bead strings, I just want to highlight the difference between a couple of them. So I'm just going to pick one up now just to give you an idea. The one that we'll use mostly today is the 20 bead string. So essentially it's got 20 beads on it. Now, sometimes I'm a little sneaky. You'll see that there's like a little knot on here and you can undo it. Sometimes I take one bead off and I have one that's only got 19 beads. So when I hand them out to the children, I make sure that they check that there are 20 beads on there, because sometimes they just accept it. The other thing you'll notice about the 20 bead string is that it's configured in fives. So you notice it says 5 red and 5 white and 5 red and 5 white. So that's deliberate. It's partly because young children can anchor off 5 things a little easier than they can off 10. So it's designed that way. And it probably links back to a thing called the Slavonic abacus. Now, I'm using 20 here. You can also buy bead strings that have got 10 beads on them. But typically what I do is just get the 20 bead string, undo the knot, slide off 10. So we just play with 10 to begin with. And then as a sort of a dexterity sort of fine motor skill thing, I get the kids to thread the beads back on. But we're going to work with 20s. Now, Heather mentioned that there's also 100. And so I've got one of these here. You won't be able to see the whole 100 in one hit. But the first difference you'll notice is that it's no longer in 5s, it's in 10s. So the 100 bead string tends to move in a bit more like a place value situation, 10 beads and 10 beads and 10 beads. Now, what I like about the 100 that we have here is there's a lot of extra space on the end of the shoelace that joins it up. And often I'll put another 20 on here and make a 120 bead string. And I'll talk to you about why we do that a little bit later. So I thought we'll start just with counting and follow them through a little bit. And so I'll get you to look at the visualizer and I'll take the 10 bead string and we'll just play with that idea now. So I'll just move that out of the way. So in this case here, there's our bead string, and I mentioned it was 20 beads, and I'm going to just split them just into 2 halves. So it's pretty obvious that we've got 10 and 10, and you can see that's 5 and 5. But now what I want to just do is build up an idea. And so I'm just going to turn this around because I want to be able to show you so it's a bit clearer with the red beads. And what I'm going to do is just do some counting here, and we'll watch some general ideas in counting. Now, when you count, there are 5 main ideas for counting. We're just going to look at 3 of them straight away. So the first one is I need to know some number names in a specific order. So I need to know it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And if I don't know those number names, we really can't do much from that point on, because if I can't say the numbers in the right order, then I'm going to struggle with my counting. The second is there'll be a one-to-one correspondence. So as I say that and I move something, there's a one-to-one correspondence. I say 1 and there's a movement, 2 and there's a movement, 3 and there's a movement, and so on. And the third key point here is the last word I say. So if I said 1, 2, 3, and I move 3 objects, that tells me what the count is. In other words, there's 3 in total. And there are 3 key ideas that we'll pick up as we go. So I'll just take you to the visualizer. You can see how this works now and get this notion. Okay, so in this case here, we'll just have a look at the beads. And you'll see as we come up on the beads, it'll come up. Maybe I'll just do it up here for this case here. So you've noticed we've got the beads at this point here, and we'll see if we can get us back onto the visualizer. But as I count, we're going to, well, here we can see it here. So as I count here, I'm going to move the beads across. Now that's 1 bead, and then I've moved 2 beads, and then I've moved 3 beads. And so we've got the notion there of how many beads are there. Now that's a question that I always ask, because some children, even though they've just moved 3 beads, won't be able to tell me that there's 3. They want to recount. Now, the fancy name for that is they don't trust their count. And they do need to trust their count, that those beads haven't moved, they haven't jumped, they're still on there. That's 3 beads. So that's one idea. Another one, I've just play with this same idea. Imagine I move 4 beads and I've got a second bead string here. And you notice how now, if you look there and you put them close together, that 4 is more or larger or longer than 3. So I'm learning that actually 4 is a larger number, 3 is a smaller number. If I go a little bit further, let me put a different one on here. And you notice here that I've put 6 down, which is 5 and 1. And so now we might ask the question, well, what number goes between 3 and 6? And so we now have to work out, well, that number would be 5. So you can see, even just using something simple as the bead strings, you start to get the idea. We can talk about being more, being less, between. And so we're getting all that language that's coming out of here by the use of the bead strings. So that's the first comment I'll make about bead strings. Let's just talk about a couple of others, and I'll just show you on the main screen now what I mean here. So I'll pick these up and let's just have a look at the main screen and we'll play with that for a moment. So in here, one of the nice things about this is that it doesn't matter how you turn the beads, notice they don't drop, and that's because there's a nice little resistance that's sitting here on the string and the bead, which means I don't always have to count like this. I can count in different ways. I can go that way and go that way. I can turn it and nothing changes in that sense. So now we're going to look at it just a different idea, same 10 beads, look at the counting idea, but now we'll extend the counting. So once we've developed our counting idea, let's go the next level and then the next level. So I'll take you back to the visualizer here. We'll have a look at the bead strings that are set up and configured and see how that works, and you'll just get the idea of what's going to happen here. So we'll play with this idea. Okay, we're just having a little bit of trouble here. It's coming up now, and we'll build this sort of thing, but I can show you anyway on this main screen. So we're going to really build this idea of these beads and how they develop and what happens with them in particular. So I'll give you an example. So we've got here now the beads are coming up. Let's have a look at this idea. We already have here, we can see 4 beads in this case here. And so I want to hold that in my head. And what I want to do is have the idea of counting on from that number. Now, what I mean by counting on. So when I count on, I've got to hold this number here. So I literally tell the children, hold it. So what am I holding? What am I holding in my head? I'm holding 4 beads in this particular case. Okay. So with the 4 beads, I've got this idea. Now, when I count on, I do one more and I go 5. And then I will go count on from there, 6. And so you're counting on from a particular point that might be there. So that's a key idea that sits in here, that building of counting on and so forth. Now, just take us into the game that you mentioned before, Heather, which was the tug of war game. And so we're just going to use 1 bead string for this. And what I'll have in place is just a dice here in this particular case. Now, the reason we're going to play this tug of war game is we want to develop a couple of ideas. So you might notice here that I've got my 20 beads that are sitting here. Okay, so if you take those 20 beads, and I want you to think about what we've done is split them into 2 parts. So we've gone into a part that's 10 and another part that's 10. And you'll see as we look at the beads, you can see that there's 2 parts. Now, the key idea here is the whole, there's still 20 beads, but I have one part here, that's 10 beads, another part here, that's 10, and we now have 10 and 10 gives me the 20. Now, the fancy name for that is called part, whole thinking. Now, in this game here, we've got a lot of language and so forth, and we're going to pretend that there's 2 players here. So imagine that I rolled a 3, okay? And I'm using a dot dice at this point here. And so I'm the player over here, and I take 3 from there. So I've been able to count and grab 3. And now what's important to me is the sentence that happens. This person will say, I have 13 beads, which you can see is 10 and 3 more. And you have 7 beads, which you can see is 5 and 2. Now, altogether, we have 20 beads. So you can see there's the part, there's the other part, and then you've got the whole gives me the 20. Now, what matters is the person playing on this side would say, well, I've got 7 beads and you've got 13 beads, and altogether we've got 20 beads. So you can see now we've got the part here, and the whole. And what's really happened is we're starting to emphasize the idea that 13 and 7 and 7 and 13 are both giving me 20. Then the fancy name, that's the commutative property of addition. But if you look at the beads here, watch what I'm going to do. I'll literally turn them around, and we've got things that we sometimes call the turnaround facts, which is really the commutative property of addition. So 13 and 7 and 13 will both give me 20. So if we continue the game now, we'll see how I could roll the dice again and imagine that we've got a new number, and I've got 5 as what's come up. So in this case here, the 5, this person's going to take them from them. So I'm going to take 5, which was 3 and 2. And now I've got another sentence. I have 12 beads, you have 8 beads. Altogether, we've got 20 beads. This person has to say, I have 8 beads, you've got 12 beads. Altogether, we've got 20 beads. So we're getting, once again, that idea of this turnaround fact that 8 and 12 and 12 and 8 will both give me the 20 idea. So that's that tug of war game that you mentioned at the start of the idea, but it's got a lot involved in it. Now, often I don't give a rule for what happens if you run out of beads. So imagine you're playing this game for a little while and you start to get to this point here, and I'm down to 1 bead, you roll something and there's no more beads to go. I don't give a rule. I'll give you 2 examples of things I've seen children do. Sometimes they just go back and split and start again, which is fine. But I have seen children put those little yellow sticky notes on the table, and I said to them, what are you doing? And they said, oh, what we're doing is writing IOUs. And I said, where did you get the idea of writing an IOU from? Oh, when we play Monopoly with our dad, we're allowed to write IOUs. Now, if you think about it, when they're using those Post-it notes, those yellow sticky notes, and writing IOUs, they're actually dealing with negative numbers. So it's a fairly significant bit of thinking in mathematics. So we've just been playing with this stock standard bead string, but you might notice that it's in half. And so we wouldn't want to just think that we're simply doing just addition and subtraction and so forth. We can later on do some fractions, which I'm going to show you in a minute. But just while we're talking about the part whole idea, what I'm going to do is split the beads this way, and you can see we've got 5 and 15, and 15 and 5 both give me 20. But watch what I'm going to do now. I'm going to cover one part. So we know the whole is always 20. There's always 20 beads on here. Now I'm asking you, what's the bit that's missing? What's the missing part that's sitting here? So 15 and white gives me 20, or 20 take 15 gives me what? So we're getting that sort of linking that's going on there. So the bead string is a great tool for this idea of missing part in the part whole questioning idea. So that's just a few really basic ideas for counting, finding larger number and so forth. There's obviously a lot more. But here's the one I think is fairly neat. So we'll take these same beads, I'm going to put them together just to make it a little easier. And in this case here, I'm going to literally halve it. And what I mean by that is I'm going to split the string. Now we could put the string, but you can see there when I put them on top of one another, and I'll just give us a little bit more room so you're able to see it a little easier. Because you've got plenty of length in this string, it just gives me a little bit more scope to do that. Okay, and now you can see that those two are sitting on top of one another. And we start to get ideas like doubles that are happening here. And you can see here that we've got 10 and 10's 20. But actually we started with 20. And if you think what I've done, I've folded it in half, and I've got half of 20 is 10. Now, we could halve it again. So I just halve that string again. So if we talk about a half of a half, that's another name for having a fourth, or 1/4 that would sit there. And if I open it up, you'll see the quarters or the bits that sit there quite easily. There's 4 equal parts that sit here. So that's another key idea that sits here. But here's the reason I like to have the big hundreds bead. And remember I mentioned having 120. So I could do exactly the same with that. Now, it's not going to be easy to see, but I could literally halve that one, split it at this point here, and you won't be able to see it fully unless I move it back a little bit. You will have, in this case here, 50 beads and 50 beads. And the question I like to ask children is, hang on, I just did a half of that 20 bead string and I got 10, and now I'm doing a half of this and I got 50. Why is that? And lots of children really have to think a bit about that, because what I've done is change the whole, or what I'm finding the fraction of. Now, I could also find a quarter and a fifth and a tenth. And obviously, if I'm using 100 beads, that allows me to do percentages, because 100 beads, it gives me my percentage idea. But remember earlier I mentioned that I would slip an extra 20 beads onto the end, and then all you have to do is undo the knot, grab 20 beads from here. Now make sure they go on in 10 and 10, and you've got 120 bead string. Now with 120 bead string, I could find half of it, I could find a third of it, I could find a fourth or a quarter of it, I could find a fifth of it, a sixth, I could go to an eighth, because 120 is such a lovely number. I could do a tenth, I could do a 12th. You can do it because 120 just gives you the flexibility to do that sort of fraction work that sits in there. So I'd hate you to think that bead strings are just for young children. They can help us sort of think a little bit there. Let me take it a step further in this fraction bit, and then probably I would have done your head in a little bit, but let's just go a little bit further on this idea. So we started this session and we were talking about just counting, okay? And we were counting in ones. So that's relatively simple. I can start counting. And as I get better at it, I probably don't need to count as much because I can just see there's a 5 there. I can see that's another 5, it's 10. So I don't always have to count in ones. I could count in twos. I've got 2 and I've got 4. And notice, remember I said the beads stick, so it's really nice. Then I've got 6, and then I've got 8, and then I've got 10. So I'm doing the multiples of 2. Well, I could count in threes if you want, and I could go 3, 6, 9, but you'll notice that the configuration and color of the bead starts to change there, which is pretty neat. And that's really partly how you do some things to do with division and bits and pieces like that. These are the multiples of 3 that we're talking about, 3, 6, 9, 12, and so on. So we start to get that focus that happens here. But there's a couple of other really interesting things that we could do. And often when maybe I'm doing a workshop with teachers, and some of the teachers of upper primary say, well, that's all well and good, but that's really basic. That's simple material other than the fraction work. So here's a thought that you might want to consider. We don't always have to call that bead 1. So I'm going to give that bead a value of 1/4. Okay, so when I count, that's 1/4, 2/4, another name for that's 1/4, okay, then I've got 3/4 or 3/4, and then I've got 4/4 or 1. So you see I've moved 4 beads and I've got to 1. So here's the question that you might want to ponder. What am I going to say when I get to the very last bead? What would I say when I got there? Well, now I've got to think a bit. I'm going to count in fourths. So if you think about it, that 4/4 give me 1. So if I move another 4 beads, that's taken me to 2. If I need another 4 beads, that's taken me to 3. If I use another 4 beads, that's taken me to 4. And now if you think about it, that's 4 and 1/4, 4 and 2/4, 4 and 3/4. Well, that must be 4 and 4/4, or another name for that is 5. So you wouldn't want to just think that the bead strings are just for really basic, simple material. They actually can be developed and used and really get a lot of thinking going. So just bear in mind, we can do counting forwards, we can count back, we can talk about this part, whole idea. We can play that tug of war game that we talked about before. There's even things, if you want to do that with an oral sort of thing, you can go and get the children to move the beads according to that, or snap your fingers, whatever it might be. So there's a constant rhythm to all of that. But here's one last thought a little bit here. After a while, the children get so good at using these beads that you can speed things up a little bit. So for example, I might say, well, move 4 beads. Well, I've got to move that and then move them back. Now move 6 beads. Now move them back. Now move 9 beads. Now I haven't got time to be counting that. Did you see how quickly I had to do that? If I'm moving 4 beads, I'm probably looking at the idea of the 5 and saying, well, moving 4 is just like moving 1 less than the 5. Moving 6 is like moving 1 more than the 5. Moving 9 beads is really like moving nearly the 10, but just 1 less than that. And so you start to get that idea of the numbers that are 1 less, 1 more, those sort of things, and the real bit. And that's starting to get us thinking for when we want to do our basic facts and so forth. So hopefully there's a few ideas to do with the bead string and some things that you might like to try yourself at another date, Heather, and hopefully give you another idea for your tug of war game that you might play.
Oh, thank you so much. I love how you changed the language, actually. I do find that even we were doing these maths groups the other day and we're doing time clocks. And when I said, say, 1:45, it totally threw the children. So I had to change my language. But it was interesting that they don't have that wide vocabulary yet. And
yes, Yeah, so a lot of them will talk about, say, 12:45 rather than 1:45. And
Yeah, or 5 to 2. It was like they looked at me like I was very foreign.
the interesting part with time is that if you're talking about things like, we talk about quarter past, which makes sense. So I often have children ask me, why isn't it 3/4 past as opposed to 1:45? So you see how tricky the language can get in that sense.
Yeah, and also the bead string is one of the most versatile. Like cubes, they're one of the most versatile. I didn't realize how much you could do with it, and just by changing the language and having that one bead string from fractions, from counting, and then progressing with it. I think sometimes we use these materials for the early years, and we forget how important they are as the children get older to still have that concrete material. But thank you so much. I know that, for example, you have a lot of resources on your website. And is the Beadstrings an ebook as well?
Yes, we've just put a lot as ebooks because of the COVID and trying to get things to people quickly. So we've accelerated putting up ebooks for people as well.
Fantastic. And there's some games on your website, and also there's always videos on your YouTube, which is where this will be available as well, and on the EDX one, which is Dr. Paul Swan, and it's EDX Education. So thank you very much to your team today. Thank you very much, Paul, for giving us the time, and we look forward to talking about bead strings.
Thanks, Heather.